joining us today on Mormon Land, where we explore news in and about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm senior religion reporter Peggy Fletcher-Stack. I'm joined by managing editor David Noyce, who oversees our faith coverage. Hi, Dave.
Hello, Peggy.
We invite you, our listeners, to show your support for Mormon Land by going to patreon.com, where with a donation as little as $3 a month, you can access all of the Tribune's religion coverage, transcripts to our podcasts, and the Mormon Land newsletter. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/Mormonland. Now for today's episode. Many faiths feature clothing they consider part of their religious identity or obligation. Muslim women don headscarves, Jewish men wear yarmulkes, Sikh men cover their hair with turbans, married Hindu couples sport sacred threads. These are all visible symbols of commitment. Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints also have adopted religious clothing known as temple garments to remind them of covenants they have made, but they are worn under street clothes and are meant to be invisible to others. This spring, Larissa Kindred, a former Latter-day Saint and recent graduate of the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth, created an online snowball survey to reach out to Latter-day Saint women about what they like and dislike about wearing garments. Kindred, who lives in Nashville, Tennessee, joins us today via Zoom to discuss her survey, the responses, and her conclusions. Larissa, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this research here.
So, first of all, what prompted you to create this survey?
So in my degree is in women's and gender studies. And so as part of that, we, study a lot of, women in how they relate to religion, how religion intersects with gender. And so I was reading a study that was done about Muslim women living in the United States. And they were saying that there's kind of cultural shifts happening where some women are choosing not to wear hijab, and some do, and kind of how they negotiate that. And as I was reading it, I just kept thinking, this is so similar to things that I've seen within the LDS community about women kind of negotiating around how they wear their garments and what they mean to them. And really with these Muslim women, the women that are choosing not to wear hijab, they have good reasons. A lot of it is doctrinally based. And then the women who do choose to wear them, it's the same thing. And so all of these women are kind of using their agency and autonomy to negotiate with their religious clothing. And this is what I've seen with LDS women as well. And so I just wanted to get numbers on it. I wanted to know, is this generational? And kind of like see what's happening within the LDS community with women.
Do you think that you having worn garments yourself for many years made you a better researcher on this?
Yeah, I think so. I spent a lot of time thinking about what my relationship was, what garments meant to be when I was wearing them. And I also knew that when I was most of my, friends and family members are LDS. And so I know that women struggle with their garments. I also know that they have meaning. And so it is a complex thing. And so I think, my personal experience wearing garments, I think helps. I also think that women will talk more to somebody who knows what their experience is. If I was maybe somebody on the outside, people might be not as open to share what their struggles are. But since I've kind of been in that realm also, I think it kind of helped people be open with their comments, with the interviews and with the survey.
So I'm sure some of the active practicing women were concerned that the narrative would be dominated by former members. How did you find a balance?
So I kind of knew that progressive women and ex-Mormon women, I knew that they would take the survey and just run with it. And so I actually put most of my effort into accessing traditional, more conservative members. And so that was kind of where most of my efforts went, because I knew once it started snowballing, women want to talk about this. And I actually think it kind of worked in my favor, because I think there were many women who took the survey because they did not want just negative feelings to be out there. They wanted to tell people that they love their garments. And I even had some people in my comments that said, I think this survey is ridiculous and I don't like that you're doing this, but they still took the survey. so I'm like, okay, I appreciate your thoughts. Thank you. And so, like that person is somebody who maybe doesn't think they should be discussed. They're very sacred and their opinion also matters. And so I'm kind of trying to create kind of like a LDS woman standpoint. And, like all these different subgroups, they all kind of have their own feelings and identities. And I want to kind of put them together so we can kind of get a better whole picture of what's going on with LDS women.
How did you find the more traditional women?
So I felt that social media was going to be ideal way to access people, and especially with the LDS community, like it's an insular group. And so usually if you can get into, Facebook groups or things like that, then it will get spread fairly quickly. And so I have friends that have Facebook groups with, women that they served missions with. One of my friends served her mission on Temple Square. And so that's an almost all female mission, with women all over the world. So she shared it in their Facebook group. And we also shared it in groups. There's a Facebook group for women who serve in Relief Society presidencies. And most of these have thousands and thousands of women in them. It was shared in a Facebook group for women who are currently serving in young women's presidencies. And I think that one might have over 20,000 women in it. And so I specifically kind of handpicked these places or found people that were interacting in those spaces to share the survey. And then even when I posted it on ex-Mormon sites, I said to people, if you have, a believing mother or, your aunts, please share it with them, because I kind of knew that would be the group that was hardest for me to access. And so I put almost all of my effort into that one, and then let the kind of like the progressive members and the ex-Mormons, they kind of did their thing.
So Larissa, how did you end up, this is in the story, but how did you end up categorizing the women? What are the categories?
Yeah, so I think asking people to define their relationship with the church, I think was one of honestly, the smartest things that I did, because when we talk about garments online, a lot of people will invalidate people's struggles, and they'll say, no, that's, that's just a fringe group, or they're just bitter and they're just trying to make trouble. But when you interact with LDS women, it starts to sound like it's not fringe. And, the New York Times did this article in 2021. And, there was a lot of women that are saying like, no, I'm really struggling with these. I asked people to categorize themselves either as traditional devout, nuanced progressive, and nuanced progressive are words that are used very, very commonly in the LDS culture. And so I knew that people would take to those words, inactive but believing, and then ex-Mormon. Okay. And I know I kind of put people in a tough position, because I had so many kind of angsty comments where they were like, I don't know exactly what I am. And so many people started, like, they would mark other, and then they would start it with, it's complicated. So I know it's hard to define, like, who am I? I'm going to put myself in a box. But really, I think it's essential for this work so that we can look at how do traditional LDS women relate to their garments versus progressive women versus ex-Mormon women, because that way I think it's easier to not have it, seem like we just got one narrative. And I knew that would be a criticism, is that they would say, she just talked to liberal people. She just talked to progressives in the church. And so if we just want to look at traditional LDS women, then we can just look at the data for them and see what their experience is. And so we can kind of do that with all the groups.
Did you get a good mix of ages?
Yes. The majority of people were between the ages of 25 and I think 44.
Okay.
And then, but I had a pretty good group. So each of those groups had over 2,000 people. 45 to 64 had maybe 1,500 people. And then my smallest group was 18 to 24. But, some women are not endowed, before they're 24. And then I have a small group of maybe, I think I have 160. I can look this up, that are over the age of 65. But even that's like a decent little sample size. So, but most of them are kind of in the middle range.
Was it mainly Americans?
It was mostly Americans. And I would say I was very interested because, in Western culture, we view body image and fashion and style in a certain way. And so this was definitely written for an American audience, but it did get spread pretty well. And we have 44 different countries that are represented. And but almost every state in the United States was represented as well. So it kind of made its way around, and somebody got a hold of it, a member in Australia, and she was sending it out to her ward in her state. And so I have a pretty big group of Australian members that took it. So, but it was kind of written or geared toward an American audience.
And that when those few that came from other countries, did they have as much in common with Americans? Did something pop up that you thought was worth further study? Did you have any Africans, for example, or Black Americans?
So I had African Americans. I had a small group of African American women. I had a few responses that were from Kenya. But I'll have to look and see that could be Americans living abroad, or it could be people who are converts. So I think those are all data points that are interesting to look into. Those would be smaller groups to look at.
Yeah.
But many people abroad mentioned the climate, and the heat seems to be a real sticking point for people who are living in warmer climates.
So give us a taste of some of the questions that you asked in your survey. There were 25 questions, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll go through these. And if you are interested in a specific one, I'll just kind of say maybe some of the main ones. We asked for demographic information. And then we asked for demographic information that related to garments, like when were you first endowed, or how long have you worn garments? And then how often you wear garments. And then we kind of got into what your personal embodied experience is while you're wearing garments. So the first question along those lines were, did the way you dressed change after you started wearing garments? And how did you feel about that change? So, and with that one, a lot of women indicated that there wasn't a major change, or that they didn't feel, really strong either way. And there's a few of these have comments attached to it where people could write in things. And this was one of them. And many of them said that when they were raised as teenagers, their parents kind of set garments as the standard for the way that they should dress. And so that there wasn't a lot of change once they started wearing garments.
So we should say for our listeners who aren't familiar that the garments cover our shoulders and a little bit over the shoulder. So a sleeveless shirt or dress would not be covering the garment, and they go very close to a knee. The bottoms go close to the knee. So it's sort of shoulders to knees.
Yeah.
So
you go ahead.
The church gives the general handbook, the temple ceremony, they give some general guidelines about wearing them daily. And but there's little detailed information on the actual wearing of garments. And this, no doubt, as you found, leads to a wide range of how members wear them. What did your survey discover about that?
Well, it's really interesting because, I think the church used to be a little more specific about how you wear them. And I know that when I was endowed, which was in the very early 2000s, it was, I was told don't put them on the floor, because, it's disrespectful, or, and I needed to wear them like day and night. And at that time, they were also, during the Temple Recommend interview, they would read, a little thing that went along with your Temple Recommend questions that said to wear them even if you were doing yard work. So it's kind of like specifically said yard work. And so, I think in my young years, I didn't see a lot of variation about how women wore garments, but that's very different with younger millennials and Gen Z women. And I think now that they've even shifted some of the words around the Temple Recommend interview, and I think it actually gives some room for interpretation for individuals to kind of engage with these in a different way.
Yeah, I looked that up, and it just basically says, do you wear them as instructed? And that gives as instructed in the temple in this case, which everyone's instructions in the temple may have varied a little bit, of course. But the guidelines themselves, and that leads to another thing. The other statement that the church says is they should not be removed for activities that can reasonably be done while wearing the garments. So that suggests, of course, that there are times that they obviously should or can be removed. So what did you find out about when in this case, women that you studied didn't wear garments? What were the most common times?
Times that they did or didn't?
Didn't, yeah.
Times. I don't know that I heard a lot of specifics of times that they are choosing not to wear garments. Like
for physical activities, maybe, if they're doing
I think
something.
For that, I think that so much of this survey, women were talking about this kind of the struggles of wearing them. And so I think that women wear them less now, because they might be having, skin irritations or UTIs or yeast infections and things like that. And so I think I heard more about those types of things that make women feel like they are justified to wear them less frequently. I didn't hear any real specifics, and we didn't ask about, like interpretation of the Temple Recommend interview. I think that would actually be really interesting to hear women talk about, like, this is when I wear them and this is why. We did ask the question, how often you wear them. And let me see if I can pull that up. 56% said they wear them at least part of each day. And the ex-Mormon women were kind of instructed to answer these questions about when they were active. So that's a good amount of women that are wearing them every day. But there are women on here that marked, I only wear these when I go to the temple, or I wear them when I go to church or social events, but I don't wear them in my normal daily life. And so I don't know if there's specific activities that, I mean, I think it's really different for each woman, but I think that this was almost looking more at like your general feelings about it instead of, and people didn't really say specific things that they say, I don't need to wear it for this anymore. If that makes sense.
Did they mention things like you talked about different reproductive things during menstruation, pregnancy, postmenopausal, et cetera? Did they bring up those things?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think, yes, those were mentioned quite a bit. And, not being able to put a pad on it, like these are struggles that you're dealing with very consistently. And so, yeah, I think even traditional devout members, that was one of the things that they marked. That was one of the biggest struggles for them was, reproductive medical type issues.
Yeah, that fascinates me because, they have these spiritual significance, but there are practical considerations when you're wearing clothes, right? Yeah. And it seems like that's probably what came up a lot, right?
Yeah. And I think that's why it's such a complex issue, is because these can have really significant meaning for you, but they can also be something that is a struggle that's difficult. And a couple of years ago, it was in 2014, there was two researchers that were looking at garments, not really from a body image lens, But Nancy Ross and Jessica Finnegan, and they were at Utah Tech. Is that the new name for Dixie State?
Yes.
So they were at Utah Tech, and they, in their writing about their research, though, they said that they found it interesting that, these can be daily irritations that can start to really wear you down and can even affect your relationship with your garments, which are a symbol of the temple. And so it could, for some people, they had found that in their survey that it could actually contribute to eroding your faith if you weren't having a good experience wearing your temple garments. So, I think we can't underestimate, the struggle that women are having with these. And I think the church, I hope, the church has made a lot of changes over time. And so I think that they are invested in making these a better experience for women. But the struggle is real. And I think we're still at the beginning of that journey. But I mean, they should be very invested in making these better for women, because I think that they have the potential to really shape your faith experience. So did some of your respondents talk about wearing them under or over bras and stuff like that? Yeah. When they talked about it, usually they were saying, this is nice that now now that's something that is a change. And again, that was not, I was instructed to just wear them, on my skin when I was in doubt. And so I always wore my bra over the top of my garments. And so a lot of women said that was a really positive change, is that, that there was, more leeway, or they were actually given direction about that so that they knew they could choose.
Yeah, that's explicitly stated in the general handbook now. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I think when people brought it up, it was usually as a sign of like, oh, that's helpful. Maybe we're moving in a good direction.
So can you give us some of your conclusions, some of your statistics that you came up with in terms of different groups of categories of women, and then maybe some of your favorite comments?
Yes, I can. So these are some of the, interesting things that I found. People write positive and negative things about garments. Let's see. There's one question. Have any of the following been more difficult to navigate with garments? Almost 3,500 marked menstruation. We talked about that. Pregnancy had high numbers, breastfeeding, sex and physical intimacy. I feel like I'm very interested in how garments affect physical intimacy, because we know they're not worn during physical intimacy, but there is some type of impact on how women relate to their sexuality. And so I think that that's something that definitely could be more explored.
What was the number on that? Or what percentage of members said that it did have some kind of impact?
So let's see. Out of my active people are, I don't have the percentage. There's around 5,600 active members, and 2,044 of them said that physical intimacy or sex was more difficult to navigate with wearing garments. So it's under, I don't know what that would be. Is that close to maybe 30%?
So tell us some other conclusions.
Okay, let me scroll. Do you feel this question says, do you feel attractive when you wear your garments? And 42%, and again, this is active members, they said no. 42% said no, I do not feel attractive or appealing. 39% said it doesn't affect me, and 7% said yes. 11% said somewhat. So 40% of people saying these don't make me feel very attractive. I think that's a very significant data point.
And that only 7% of actives said yes to that. Right?
Yeah. And, I understand, I feel like I don't know that when I think of my experience, I don't know that mine really swayed me one way or the other. So I was probably somebody that would have answered they are not super a factor in how I feel. But yeah, 42% I think that's very, very significant and worth looking into is feelings of attractiveness. And this is, there were some people in the comments that said, hey, we don't worry about fashion, or we don't worry about, the trends of the world. But that's not what this survey was about. It was about how you feel really about yourself and in your embodied experience. And so, yeah, that was an interesting one. This question says, overall, how do garments impact your feelings about your body? The options were generally positively, does not affect my body image, and generally negatively. So 47% said that garments do not affect their body image, 7% said generally positively, and 45% said generally negatively. And again, this is just from my active LDS group. So these are kind of big numbers. How do you feel garments affect physical intimacy? 41% said that it had a negative impact. So again, like I said before, these are not worn during sex, but some women in the comments said, I don't feel comfortable being naked because there's always this, like keep your body covered, or it makes me feel like I'm not super attractive. And so it doesn't, make me feel very sexual. And so there's definitely some interesting elements there about how garments are tied to women relating to their sexuality. This is one that I feel like is very interesting. Given the option, would you continue to wear garments as a reminder of your covenants, or would you opt for a different reminder? And 22% of active women said, let's keep it. 30% said keep it, but make changes. And 47% said we would like another option. And then this is one that I was in the comments, I was very intrigued about. Have you ever felt judgment around your garments and how you wear them? And 60% said, yes, I have felt judged. 40% said no. And one of the comments on that one, somebody said, I'm a BYU student, so obviously yes. So I was kind of like, what's the culture at BYU? And is everyone garment checking each other at BYU? But I think that's something that is, I think, is maybe one of the most concerning things that came out of this survey is the social aspect of kind of garment checking that people were reporting and the behaviors that came from it. And so I think that's been a big focus for me, is kind of looking and analyzing that, is what's happening socially around garments within the LDS culture.
It does seem like the judgment brought out some of the strongest comments too. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The fear of that kind of in the culture.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
It kind of goes both ways too. It's like,
yes,
women get judged for not wearing them, or not wearing them appropriately, or wearing, sleeveless shirts or something to indicate they're not wearing. But then as a marker, then ex-Mormons are also looking and judging women who are visibly wearing them. It's just like,
yeah,
you kind of can't win,
I had one comment that I had read that they said that they feel like non-members are not judgmental of them wearing garments. They, if once you explain it, they're like, oh yeah, we know other groups that wear religious clothing. And so it didn't sound like, members feel judgment from outside the LDS community, but somebody did indicate, they said, no one is terrible to me about my garments except people who have left the church. And then you have groups of people who say, I'm in the church and I'm not wearing my garments, and they are, people in the church are judging me. So yeah, it seems to be very much like within the LDS community, including ex-Mormons, where a lot of this judgment is kind of circulating.
Have you thought about seeing what Latter-day Saint men think about their garments?
I haven't. I think that women...
Did it come up at all in Saint, in any responses, or? You know what?
I put a little feeler out on Twitter, and I had a few men that had messaged me and said, like, well, I'd like to talk about my garments. And in the research that Nancy Ross and Jessica Finnegan did, they had men and women. But I mean, I just think the way that women's bodies are, society's messaging around women's bodies, and then women's clothing styles, I think that makes women's experience so different from men's experience. I think I think it's valuable to understand men's experience with their garments as well. I just feel like my personal focus and passion is what are women's experiences? How is this affecting sexuality? It's hard to love your body and, be a woman in this society and to really embrace, who you are. And so are garments adding to this, or are they complicating it? Is the question. And so I would encourage maybe somebody else to look at men's experience with garments. I'm all about the LDS women and the women's experience. So this is kind of my wheelhouse.
Did you have any trans women taking the survey?
I did.
What's been their experience?
It is very, very interesting. And I did a in-depth interview with a trans woman, and it was actually very, very moving. And it's interesting because they are women who were raised as boys in the church. And so they really haven't grown up with the messaging of cover your bodies. And so they seem to be less affected by kind of some of the body messaging around garments. And one thing that I found that was just absolutely fascinating is that several trans women said that they felt that garments were one of the first ways that they affirmed their gender to themselves when they were transitioning. So it's kind of interesting because garments are meant to be, just for yourself, between you and God. That's why they're worn under clothing. And so I think for these women, they could transition to wearing women's garments before they were ready to socially come out. They could start wearing women's garments. And so it was actually a beautiful gender affirming experience for them to switch and start wearing women's garments. And garments are very gendered. The women's have lace on them and, they fit different. So I think that transgender women, the ones that I talked to, they actually very much embraced their garments because it was part of them affirming their identity. And so that's also kind of a subgroup that I think needs more research to see what their experience is, because they the ones that I talked to, I found that they actually maybe love and have more meaning with their garments because some of the maybe problematic pieces are taken out of it.
So did your research prompt some suggestions that you could offer the church?
I asked in one of the questions when I asked, would you like a different option, and do you have any suggestions? One thing that's kind of maybe sad is that many women in the comments said, I don't know that this will significantly change. And I think that's valid. But, the church has made small adjustments over time, and they do seem invested in understanding what the women are saying. They've conducted their own surveys about this. So, but I think many women kind of felt like, I don't know if this is going to go anywhere. There were some women in the final comments that said, would you share this with church headquarters? And I was kind of like, I don't know who you I don't know who to call to, I don't know that it'd be well accepted at church headquarters, but I personally think the church should be invested in this information because, how we relate to our religious clothing is part of, our experience with our faith. And you want women to have a good experience with that. And in addition, the church's messaging about bodies is very beautiful. They believe that our body is essential to us being like God. And so you don't want to, if that's the purpose, if that's the doctrine of bodies within the LDS church, you need to care about women's embodied experience, how they feel in their bodies, how they embrace their sexuality. These are all really important parts of mortal life, according to LDS doctrine. And so we definitely can't downplay and be like, well, there's some irritations like menstruation or breastfeeding. Those aren't small irritations. These are big deals. This is like how we live in our bodies as women. And so I think it's really important information.
So do you have any plans for follow-ups?
So I'm working on getting something published. I was working with a research person at UMass Dartmouth, and she has no connections to Mormonism at all. And she was just eating this up. She was so interested in it. She felt like it had publication, potential for not just religious studies, but also, feminist studies or, sociology and things like that. So that's kind of my next step, is to work on getting a few things ready for publication. And then this summer I'm presenting about this at Sunstone there in Salt Lake. And so I'm excited to be in Utah to talk about this. And I think the Sunstone crowd will probably be accepting and interested in it. So those are kind of what's on the docket for me in regards to this research.
Larissa Kindred, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's been great talking to you about this.
And thanks to Dave Noyce.
Always a pleasure.
And to our producer, Nicole Weaver. We remind our listeners they can keep up on all the happenings in and about the church by subscribing to the Salt Lake Tribune's free Mormon Land newsletter. Just go to sltrib.com to sign up, and we'll talk again next time on Mormon Land.